Welcome to Second Look Education. I'm Amy.
And I'm Candace.
We're educators examining what's really happening in classrooms, policy, and teacher preparation. When joy is treated as optional, when professional judgment is replaced by scripts, and when compliance is mistaken for quality, both teachers and children pay the cost.
This podcast is our refusal to normalize that. Are we educating for compliance or for a future of educated critical thinkers?
That question drives everything we do. Each episode starts with a real moment from education, something observed, experienced, or encountered that made us pause and ask, what's actually going on here?
We dig into the complexity, we reject false binaries, and we refuse to pretend that what we're seeing is sustainable. This is Second Look Education.
Welcome back to Second Look Education. Today we have another moment to discuss and dive into and think about, and Candace is bringing us our moment today to take a second look.
Welcome back. So this is actually building off of our episode on joy. And so I wasn't done with it. So I'm moving into, who gets to love learning. And so after doing that episode and then doing more reading and moving into some research, it's been sitting with me. Just to follow up, I have talked to my niece recently, and we're starting to develop a love of learning, and in terms of reading at least. And so that was some good news. We've been talking about how to get cozy with a book, and I took her to the library, and so she's really, that's grown and she's getting much better. So that was exciting news for me.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about all these patterns that I'm seeing and having trouble really, they're not something I can ignore anymore. And so a couple things that happened, a teacher conversation that stayed with me recently. A teacher said basically that in her classroom, they have to follow the pace of the curriculum.
Yeah.
They all have to be at the same spot at the same time. And no matter what's happening in the class, behavior-wise or engagement-wise, you just keep going.
Keep teaching.
Keep teaching.
The show must go on.
The show must go on, and the students that are listening will get it. And it just needs to continue. And this teacher shared she's having some behavior management, and she's a newer teacher, and classroom management issues. So she's like, I don't know how to just teach and just ignore the students some big behavior things. And when you ignore them, usually they escalate. I shouldn't say sometimes. And I was thinking to myself, is this really where we're at, where we're saying just keep pushing through? And then another conversation, a pre-service teacher, actually quite a few of them that are like, you teach us all these developmentally appropriate strategies, you model them for us, we do all these great things, and we talk about getting these deeper level learning and inquiry level questions, and then we get in the classroom and we're like, this is what you teach.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's all the slides already done.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, where is the individuality in that, right?
Where's the space for teaching?
Yes, yeah. Space for teaching, all those things. And so my own daughter, who's in college, and then a few of the students I've had discussions with, just this, even in higher education. So I started thinking about elementary and younger students and middle school and even high school, but even higher ed, we keep hearing all this research around relational teaching. And my daughter and a few other students have just been sharing, like, the professors that are there, if their TAs aren't teaching, then it's like, even those professors, there's no relationship and they're just handing out information, and there's no teaching pedagogy or strategies. It's just like lecture. One of her classes, she gets like packets of worksheets, and I'm like, in college?
Wow.
And she's like, yeah, I just got to finish this packet. And I'm like, a packet? Like, and so even there, I'm like, what are we doing? This is college. We're paying a lot of money, but also this is where you're supposed to be getting into that. Like, college is where you're exploring and getting more in depth. And I do understand that sometimes in general ed courses it's a little different. But so I was thinking about, now we're getting into college and we're not enjoying college. And then more and more students aren't interested in college.
And college is that space where you should be, having those bigger conversations and having time to deeply grapple with, concepts.
And then, so like now it's pre-service teachers who are also talking about, taking those practices in the classroom, how they don't exist. And then they're asking, what do we do with students that are behind? Teachers talking about how they have to continually, they're talking about catching up students, but also following these curriculums. Students who are disengaged and they're either compliant or they're acting out. And, there's a lot of behavior things we hear about. College students just moving through college without joy or ownership. And then we're not going to get into this today, but this leaks into this whole cheating and AI use that's happening. And then what are they learning? Do we want our doctors, learning just by cheating their way through with AI? No, probably not. Classrooms where urgency is louder than curiosity. So like, oh, I have a question about that. What if? No, there's none of that. It's like, okay, we have to continue moving. Um, the emotional tone around learning, right? So like the whole tone around learning and what that actually is. And so if this language is always deficit, pace, urgency, remediation, where does the joy live, or where does it even have space to live? And so what if the absence of joy isn't random, but a result of how learning is being organized? So all of these things just built off that prior episode, and now, my brain can't stop working. So last time we focused and I talked a lot about Goldie Muhammad, and she talks about joy isn't just fun in the moment, it's sustained fulfillment. And that matters because some students aren't just missing fun, they're missing the actual fulfillment. And so when I say joy, I don't just mean fun, right? It's deeper than that. It's sustained fulfillment, belonging, meaning, identity. And so what conditions require that joy? And are they available equally? Because the more I listen, the more I hear some learners being invited into thinking, while others are managed through urgency. And so that difference really matters.
So this kind of actually makes me think about my own education in schooling, because I've always loved school, loved it. And because I was good at it, I could achieve in the system. It was built for me, like I loved doing everything about school. And in like third grade, it was very formative for me. It was when I tested into a gifted program, and I am not gifted. I'm really good at school. And so I was placed in this classroom with a bunch of my friends who were also good at school. And the way that we were treated in this class was, I'm finding out now, different than the way other children went through school. And so like we do a ton of projects. We spent a lot of time on things. I can remember we put on a play for like a month, and like we did the sets and we did the acting, and our parents, sewed our costumes. And like I remember being there all day. Like there was no other subjects. We were in the theater like putting this play together, and thinking back on that. And so that's what I was looking for, like when I started teaching, was like making this space where we could have these both in-depth conversations and projects, but like we had a relationship, like you're talking about this relational aspect of like the teachers there, and we're facilitating learning. And so I could never understand, especially like I have a little brother who like hated school. I could never understand why everyone didn't love school, because I had, now that I've gone through school and I've taught and all of this stuff, like the experience was different. Like my experience was very different than a lot of other.
A privilege to find that joy in learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up, because when I talk to our pre-service teachers, I always ask them, to name one thing that they remember from school. And it's never, worksheets or handouts. But myself, by second grade, we were placed into ability groups. And so for English and reading, I was in like this, I wouldn't say gifted, but like higher level. But for math, I was, whatever, bluebird at that point. You're a bluebird. You always stay a bluebird. That they didn't do this like, oh, we reassess and we move students as we go. No, it was like once a bluebird, always a bluebird. And so math just became this defining moment where I wasn't good at it. But I still remember units from that reading, and it was like imaginative, and we took care of our dinosaurs. I always tell the students the story, and it was, we would then play with them at recess. Like it became this like huge thing, and we knew everything. And since that lesson, like the Stegosaurus is still my favorite dinosaur, just because of that experience and, all the things I can name. But my math, it was worksheets, handouts. I don't think there was as much manipulatives back then. That was a while ago. But it was like, so, because I was in remediation technically. And I never really got out of that bubble.
And well, that's what I was going to ask. Did you ever like find a love of math?
I don't think I love math. My own kids are that math is their jam, but I don't think I found a love of math, but I finally understood math when I took a math for teachers class. And that's because we were taught in all different ways. And I was like, oh, it clicked. But the biggest concept was this, like, I saw both sides at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I continued to not get a connection to math, yet I had this, and then I developed into, like, I loved writing and I continued to writing on my own, reading on my own, and I believed that I was good at these things. And it carried me through.
The other thing that I want to mention about like my experience like with the play and like whatever we were those like deep projects, like they were challenging still, right? And that's what I want to mention is it wasn't like these things were easy and fun and we got to do these things because they were special. It was challenging, but it was more meaningful because we got more time to spend with whatever we were
More
working
depth.
on.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the difference too. Like there's joy in it. You create, this identity, and you had the sense of belonging. You all had to work together. I mean, we, have labeled social emotional learning, with like as a buzzword now, but like really that's whole child learning, what you were engaged in, what I was engaged in. And then it's not that we didn't need to know these math problems, but there was something missing if you're not, if you're still not growing within that. And so there was definitely no joy there. I was like, oh, what's the point? I mean, obviously you have to be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, but that wasn't brought to us. Like, you're not told like, well, this is why you need to do this. I think as teachers, sometimes we're like, we just do it,
Yeah.
So it brings like this unsettled and sad feeling. And I keep seeing this, but everyone deserves an education that challenges them, ask them to think critically, need that connection to themselves within it to understand like why are we learning, and that developing that fulfillment of learning and questioning, right? Like learning how to stop and question or talk about things. Especially we have this world where we're told information, right? So earlier and earlier students are like on social media tools, YouTube, whatever, and they're being told information.
Yeah.
But you could tell us somebody anything.
Yeah.
And then how do we teach them then to pause and to think critically, to explore truths if we're doing technically the same thing in schools? This is what it is. This is what it is. And so while this environment does exist in some spaces, it doesn't exist in a lot, if not most. And we don't individualize based on students, community, or schools themselves, which one neighboring school can be completely different from the next. And so we're not really thinking about those things.
Yeah, I agree.
I was really thinking about, why is joy often absent where control is the highest? And what are we being nudged to normalize? And then are some students being prepared for curiosity while others for compliance? And I do think it's more and more compliance. And so something we touched on before, children don't start disconnected from learning. Joy is treated like something extra. So like think about a baby. A baby's already interested in their hands and their feet. Or you put a toddler in a backyard and they're like checking everything out. You don't have to tell them, hey, go explore. Show me what you're interested in. They just do these things naturally. So like, where do we lose this? And there's a lot of motivation research, even some research I did working with teachers themselves, and people thrive where they experience autonomy, competence, and connection.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense, right? Like we're human beings. All these things are really important. So joy may not be the reward after learning. It may be the conditions that allow learning. So like the real work is done. Maybe now we can enjoy learning, but instead research says the opposite. Joy may be part of what makes deep learning possible.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that.
I mean, why do we want to explore? Why do we want to go deeper? So Siegel, one of his quotes is learning requires emotional safety and relationships shape the brain. So, and we need to feel safe, right? And it sounds like cheesy, sentimental language, but for us to actually learn, we have to feel emotionally safe. And so relationships shape the brain. So even thinking back to that higher ed conversation, if we're not creating these relational, then it's not a safe place to even ask questions. And then we wonder why students don't come for office hours or that kind of thing. But even in younger ages, when we're focused so much on compliance, there's no relational, then there's no like even wanting to work towards this level of learning.
Yeah. And I mean, when we think about what's so important about teachers is that they are empathetic, right? And they can take the pulse of their classroom. And when they are not given opportunities or allowed opportunities to do that because of the pacing, or we have
Yes.
to get through the content, then that all goes away. Like you're talking about that relationship. They can't, we don't have time to pay attention to how you're feeling today because
But we say it through
yeah,
social emotional learning that we care, but there's not time,
right.
right? And it just increases the more we get into a certain environment. I was really thinking about finding that emotional safety place and then developing that joy of learning. And I was thinking about more recently, so moving into adulthood. And the place that I keep coming back to where I learned to think probably the most critically was in our doctoral program.
Yeah.
And our program was built on that. And I remember being so uncomfortable. And you would get this information and I would have to like process and digest it. And sometimes it was like painful because you really were pushing back on some beliefs
Yeah.
and being challenged on systems that you had been surrounded with however many years based on our age. And so I would have to sit and process, and I was uncomfortable and really challenged me beyond my base knowledge. There was times I remember just getting sad and having to take some time to digest and process. But I didn't want to stop learning because I loved that I was learning something new and it was pushing me beyond my boundaries. But there was a level of safety in our program too, and it was the environment was created for this.
Yeah.
And so we were all exploring these topics, and we would have these moments to digest and process
And talk together, right? Like my experience is different than yours, but we can share them in this space and see each other's perspectives and talk through those very, very heavy issues.
And it wasn't, the nice thing was like our program, yes, we had things to read and we had things to do, but it wasn't like a push as much timeline wise. Like we would have time to explore these topics in class. We were in person too, which I swear made a huge difference. I don't know if I would have those conversations online, but the biggest thing here is I found joy despite the painful knowledge that I was growing and the fact that I was being challenged to really push back on some things and to think truly critically. There was fulfillment in it. So this is where that's like, it's joy doesn't mean just like, oh, all fun. We're not like skipping and always coloring pictures. It's that pushing back. So moving into that, like systems producing more joys than others. So if joy depends on autonomy, safety, belonging, then systems matter, right? And some environments are rich in those conditions while others are not. So we talk about things like scripts, scripted curriculum, surveillance, constant remediation, fear of falling behind. And then it's like constantly like everyone's behind, well, if everyone's behind, there's something wrong, right? Narrow pacing. So going back to that, we all have to be tested at the same time. We all have to be in the same pace. There's some schools that the expectation is if your principal walks in and it's this time, you're in this part of the lesson.
I've heard that as well.
Mind blown to me.
I know.
And so Peter Gray talked about like anything anyone is forced to do is work. And so someone doing another person's schedule becomes work and not learning. And I understand the real world has us on a schedule and that sort of thing, but we're in school still. What are we doing?
Talk about that. Like, why do some schools, like in your example, like why would it matter to a principal if everyone in second grade is on the same lesson at the same time?
Well, I think that's the downward pressure, right? Because this whole thing with fidelity, like if we're doing it with fidelity, then you're following the pacing schedule and you're following the script. And so the principal wants to make sure you're following with fidelity. So that compliance administrator, and again, I don't know if it's the principal themselves or but what they're being told, we don't know where within that system it lies, is being told like this is the way it's supposed to be done. And I think oftentimes, and there's some programs right now that are being called into question where it's like, oh, it doesn't work. Well, you're not using it with fidelity. You're not following it exactly. Yeah, but when I did follow it exactly, I lost my entire class. There was no interest, no engagement. And I also have to engage my students because I'm evaluated on that. And I kind of tie that engagement almost to joy too, right? Like they're interested in wanting to learn. There's some sort of connection. And that doesn't mean you love everything you're learning, but you see a purpose in learning in it itself.
Yeah. It seems to me like very fear-based.
Mm-hmm.
If, I'm the administrator and I'm worried that everybody in second grade isn't on this page, then there is something bigger that is scaring me about
Yes.
where they need to be or where I think they should be, or this fear of
Well,
failure.
yes. And then the teachers, if I'm not there at this time.
And like you mentioned surveillance too,
Yeah.
then there's the watchful gaze,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Constantly. And so like that fear goes down to our students.
right.
Joel Mehta says schools often prioritize coverage over depth. We often move students through content faster than we help them connect to it. And that's that pacing, right? It goes exactly to that pacing. And so efficiency over humanity, right? Classrooms giving curriculum with scripted tests, pacing guides, let's catch the students up, but yet we're moving on without them.
Mm-hmm. And we know that's not how learning works.
No.
We need time.
And that's I think the part, everything around research says that this is not how it works.
Yeah.
Yet we continue within the system. Thinking about holding both to be true, I do believe that the system's the issue. I think we have wonderful teachers out there. And again, and wonderful admins too. We really do have wonderful admins out there. It's something within the system that has created that says that we've got to go through. We've all got to keep moving. You've got to keep pacing. And it's not to say that we should spend a week on one lesson, but knowing your students, and knowing where to get in there.
Like you said, the autonomy or the agency, even more so, right? To do that, to be able to say, you know what? No, I'm not ready to move on.
Yeah.
We're not ready to move on. Or we already know this and we're going to skip it.
Yes.
I think that it comes back to teacher trust, right?
Yes.
Professionalization. You've talked about this before, but you are licensed to do this
Yes.
job.
Yes. You earn a license for this.
Teaching.
Yes. Yeah. And so conversation becomes a little more difficult. So where I look at control as the highest, and I've had this conversation in a lot of places, and script fidelity, we learn to hate that word more and more, matters most. Relevance is the weakest, and children are described most by deficits. And so I continually see patterns, and they often follow race, class, language, and power. And so talking about achievement gap over education debt, and this is where Gloria Lansing-Billings challenged us to stop talking about achievement gaps and consider education debt. So the accumulated impact of what systems have failed to provide. And so if debt is uneven, joy could be uneven too. So I was thinking about where I've seen differences, and they're all over the place. We're in a lot of schools, but I was privileged to visit a school in this beautiful setting. They do a lot of outdoor education. They're fed these amazing meals, and class sizes are small. They're outdoors. There's like free range. They're high achieving still all of those things, but there's so much freedom in their learning. And just looking at the children and their joy in what they're doing. But it's a very expensive school. It's a very exclusive school. And that in itself says a lot, and who we're seeing there and who we wouldn't be able to see there. And even it was mentioned that like scholarships are offered at this place. And I was like, yeah, but even accessibility, where it's located, all those things, people knowing about it in the first place. And so, yeah, it's wonderful. And we have a lot of places and spaces like that. But then you go into communities where those aren't necessarily available. And so the more and more it's like, oh, students are behind, let's catch them up, but let's keep moving on without them. And why does this happen so much in those schools? What if we did it differently? What if we did focus on joy and depth of learning? And having both of those, do we really want all students to be critical lifelong learners? Do we want that for all students? Does the system even want that?
That's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
Candace, is that the system doesn't want that.
Right. Well, and I quoted Love last time, but joy is crucial for social change, which means joy isn't fluff. It's part of human freedom. And so do we want this if it's talking about human freedom? What do we really want? What are these types of things that we're trying to get across? Joy should not be conditional in learning, nor should depth of learning. Historically, we know the research shows schools were built for assimilation, right? The founding of schools, the what was taught, how it was taught was all assimilation. And so how much of that has really changed? We talk about third grade test scores determining the trajectory of our students.
Right.
So do we just give up on them in third grade? As a former third grade teacher, that always infuriated me, but I think it made me madder when I was a fifth grade teacher. Because like, if you truly believe that, then I'm in fifth grade and what am I doing here?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we're stuck.
And I don't believe that by no means, personally. And then thinking about where turnover and retention happen, right? Or all these teachers who do want to bring these things, they want more time, they want more depth. We started, I don't know if you guys, spiral curriculum when you were teaching. And so we talk about depth and they're like, no, you just keep moving, it'll come up later.
Right.
But if they didn't get it the first round and I'm going to be racing through it the second round, in 2 weeks or
then
whatever.
By the third, they'll get it.
Maybe. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't come back to concepts. I'm not saying that at all. But like, if they're expected to master this before they leave, standards wise, then why am I rushing through? Shouldn't we just be like touching back on it through this spiral? It just, that whole depth of learning tied in with joy of learning, I mean, we should be questioning everything. Our students should be questioning everything. They should know how to question and how to learn and how to explore. And every child should have that opportunity. I wonder sometimes if we did flip and say these schools that we use so much deficit language and changed it and created a system that was built on their identities and sense of belonging and brought in that joy and depth of learning, if we'd actually see that they're not behind, they're just disengaged.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we would.
So, I mean, in the classroom, we're not just teaching skills. Yes, they do need these skills, but we're shaping this relationship with learning, individuals, humans, and their relationship. And, I keep coming back to like they're humans, they're individuals, they're in this contextual environment, all these things to be thinking about. And so joy is not absent equally, although it is absent in most that I've experienced places, not all. But if joy is sustained fulfillment, then we should ask which children are being sustained by school and which are being depleted by it. And that was Dr. Mohammed again. But she has so much, we have all these people in this research saying so many powerful things. Well, maybe it's time to start listening. In your own context, where is joy protected and where is it conditional? I was thinking about my niece. She's just in a middle class school, but she's got people around her that are really into learning and reading and wanting. So she has these conversations. But if you're not in an environment of that and school isn't creating that, then when I think about joy and fulfillment and questioning things and wanting to be able to explore, I'd almost ask our listeners, like, why are you listening to this podcast? Does it connect with you in some way? Are you looking for something? Are you interested in learning and discussing? Are you thinking critically? Is this something that you've been exploring on your own and now you have a space for it? Because technically that is your deeper learning. They're finding joy in some type of learning. They want to learn more. They're listening obviously to support us, but also there's something they're trying to gain from it. And so that's that fulfillment factor, that questioning factor, I hope.
So then if we're juxtaposing compliance with joy, are they mutually exclusive? One, like if we're compliant, then there is no joy. Or like, where is the space for like, we know kids need to learn how to read and we know they need to learn their math facts. And we know they need to learn basic geography, right? Like there has to be space for those foundational skills. But what if they don't like it? What if
I don't think it's a matter of liking it. I think that goes back to that quote, it's about fulfillment. It's not about or like there are certain things like when I brought up getting to those standards, it's understanding the connection and the need for learning, that fulfillment and joy, being challenged yet achievable. Students all deserve to be challenged. They all deserve to have these opportunities to achieve, but the joy comes from the fulfillment of, I can learn this. I see myself in this. I know my classroom community wants me to learn this, and it's done in an engaging way. So we've always had to teach these standards. Yeah. They're different, but they've changed over time. We, change things, but we met those standards before scripted curriculum. We just need to take a look and make sure that everyone is having that same experience. And then that asks for some shifts in the way and what we're teaching, but that requires some individuality that needs to be afforded to those teachers.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you say like the way that we approach what we're
Yes.
doing in the classroom
Yeah.
is where the joy is.
Yeah,
Right?
that's where the joy comes from,
Yeah.
is being able, giving teachers that autonomy. Yes, you have to achieve these things, but I trust you to know your students and know the community and know what they need to achieve those things, you
Yeah.
know.
You mentioned this before, but making those connections clear for the students. This is something I talk to the pre-service teachers about a lot. It's like making the real world connection, especially in early childhood, because they're such fundamental skills,
Yes.
and making sure that kids can see what they are learning in their environment,
Right.
so they can build those connections.
Right. I mean, look at high schools. High school kids, there's a lot going on. In middle school too, like emotionally and hormonally and all those things. But what if we took a minute to tell them why they're learning this or how it does apply?
Yeah.
I have these conversations in my household, but I didn't understand what I would use algebra for.
Mm-hmm.
But it's used, it's just not, it becomes a natural thing that you're using without realizing it. It's used for multiple jobs. And even if you don't go to college and you decide to go into trades, you still have to be able to take those math exams and those reading exams and all those things. You still need those basic skills. And so I think we get like, as teachers, sometimes it's like, well, why are you asking? Because we have to, right? No, let me tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes back to that intentionality. But if we could connect.
Well, and teachers need to know why.
Yes.
And if you don't know why and you can't explain why, then maybe you shouldn't be teaching that.
Yes.
Maybe you shouldn't be wasting your time on that, right? This makes me think about the other day, my fourth grader was complaining that her finger hurt because she was writing so much. And I couldn't wait to hear about like what she was writing about. She's like, we are writing summaries every day. We have to read and we have to write a summary. I'm like, oh, this skill,
She's building her finger muscles.
Serve you, but this skill
Yes.
that your teacher is making you practice over
Yes.
and over, read something and then digest it and summarize it and write it with your hand with a pencil.
Yeah.
Like that skill, those skills are going to serve you for the rest of your life.
I'm surprised you didn't email that teacher and thank her.
Write her a little love note about thank you for making her write, making her finger hurt. But really, it's like that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like she doesn't like it, but for her teacher and for myself to be able to say no, you need to be able to read something really long and then interpret it and then re-explain it or put it in your own words. Like that is a life skill.
Well, and the research behind, we'll get into that later, but the power behind holding something and writing it. Yeah, the power behind that pencil. But yeah, and just see how excited you got talking about that.
I know.
There's fulfillment in that. And so, do we truly want a world that guides every child to want to learn, to question, to explore, to find joy in learning? Is that something we really want? Is that what we're seeking? So just leaving you all with the question, which students are being sustained by schools and which are being depleted about it? So on your own, look around, just really ponder this and take a second look. Thank you for joining us.
See you next time.